David Goggins begins his journey in a place that many people would consider irredeemable, a turbulent childhood filled with abuse, fear, and poverty. He paints a vivid picture of growing up in Williamsville, a seemingly idyllic neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, but the reality for Goggins and his family was anything but peaceful. Behind the walls of their home on Paradise Road, there was no paradise, only chaos, pain, and the tyrannical presence of his father, Toughness Goggins. Toughness was a businessman who owned a roller rink, Skateland, but his veneer of success masked a dark and abusive nature. David's nights were spent working in the rink alongside his brother and mother, scrubbing toilets, polishing the floor, and inhaling the toxic scent of skate disinfectant, long after his peers had gone to bed. Goggins' father ruled with an iron fist, turning the family into his unpaid workforce. The abuse wasn't just verbal or emotional, it was physical and unrelenting. David recalls the violence inflicted on his mother and the punishments he endured as a child. His father's belt, always nearby, became a weapon of control. The scars left on David's body were a reflection of the deeper psychological wounds inflicted by years of fear and submission. School should have been a refuge, but his late-night shifts at Skateland left him exhausted, and he could barely stay awake in class. The bruises on his arms and legs told a story he couldn't share. He had to hide them, ensuring no one would ask questions that might provoke his father's wrath further. Despite this bleak backdrop, David's young mind harbored a sense of rebellion, even if it was buried deep under layers of terror. One night, after witnessing his father beating his mother, he gathered the courage to fight back. He jumped on his father's back, flailing with his tiny fists, trying to protect the person who had shown him glimpses of love and care. It was a small act of defiance in the face of a seemingly insurmountable force, but it planted a seed of resistance in his soul. Eventually, his mother, Jackie, made the bold decision to escape. The process wasn't easy. Toughness controlled every aspect of their lives, including the family's finances, leaving Jackie without the resources to leave. She was forced to play the long game, regaining his trust so she could secure a credit card. When the moment came, she packed their belongings in garbage bags, bundled David and his brother into a car, and drove away. The escape wasn't without obstacles. An old Volvo breaking down in the middle of nowhere tested her resolve, but she found the strength to keep going. The family found refuge with Jackie's parents in Indiana, far from the tyrannical grasp of Toughness. This move marked the beginning of a new chapter for David, but the trauma of his early years didn't fade easily. Settling in a small Indiana town brought its own set of challenges. He entered second grade for the second time, struggling with basic skills like reading and math. His teacher, Sister Catherine, proved to be a turning point. Unlike others who dismissed him as a lost cause, she invested extra time and effort, refusing to let him fall through the cracks. Through her patience and dedication, David made significant progress, but his journey was far from over. As David adjusted to his new environment, he began to confront the long-lasting effects of his past. The weight of the abuse, coupled with feelings of inadequacy, often made him feel like an outsider. His early experiences taught him that life was cruel and unfair, but they also gave him a unique perspective. He understood, even as a child, that survival required more than just enduring, it required adaptation and a willingness to fight back against the hand he had been dealt. David's early years are a powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to endure unimaginable hardship. They illustrate how even in the darkest of circumstances, there is a choice, to succumb to the pain or to use it as fuel for transformation. This chapter sets the foundation for Goggins' later achievements by showing that he didn't start his journey with extraordinary talent or privilege. Instead, he began with a set of cards that could have easily led to a life of mediocrity or destruction. His story is a reminder that the path to greatness often begins in the depths of despair. Through his candid and raw recounting of these formative years, David challenges readers and listeners to examine their own lives. He asks them to confront the excuses they use to justify stagnation or failure. Whether it's an abusive childhood, a lack of resources, or a history of mistakes, he shows that these challenges, while valid, don't have to define the rest of one's life. By sharing his truth so openly, he empowers others to face their own pain and use it as a catalyst for change. The chapter ends with an invitation to take inventory of the challenges and excuses that hold you back. David doesn't sugarcoat the process. He acknowledges that confronting these truths will hurt, just as his own realizations hurt him. But he also emphasizes that this step is essential for growth. It's the first step toward mastering your mind and defying the odds, just as he began to do as a child. David Goggins' life took on a new shape in the quiet town of Brazil, Indiana, but as he settled into this environment, the deeper truths of his life became unavoidable. This chapter is a raw examination of facing the reality of one's circumstances. It's about looking in the mirror and seeing yourself clearly, acknowledging every weakness, every lie, and every limitation you've accepted as fact. For Goggins, this process was painful, yet it was the catalyst for his transformation. When his mother started dating Wilmoth Irving, a carpenter and general contractor, their life seemed to stabilize for the first time. Wilmoth was a kind, gentle presence, a stark contrast to the violent and controlling figure of David's father. Wilmoth provided a semblance of security, and for a brief time, it seemed like David's family might find peace. But life had other plans. Wilmoth's sudden and violent death, shot multiple times in his garage, shattered the fragile stability David and his mother had found. The event wasn't just a tragedy, it was a reminder of how fleeting and fragile safety can be. This loss brought David face to face with a grim truth: the world doesn't owe you fairness or comfort. While his mother descended into a state of emotional withdrawal, David's grief manifested as anger and confusion. He found himself alone with his thoughts, replaying the cycles of violence and loss that had defined his life. At just 14, he struggled to comprehend why his family seemed destined to suffer one hardship after another. His mother's emotional unavailability compounded his sense of isolation, leaving him to navigate his pain without guidance. School, once a potential safe haven, became a battleground. At Cathedral High School, a private institution his mother scraped together money to afford, David felt completely out of place. His academic struggles continued, and the weight of his insecurities only grew heavier. Instead of seeking help, he turned to cheating as a way to cope. It was a short-term fix that alleviated some of the pressure but ultimately deepened his feelings of inadequacy. Even as he excelled in basketball and earned a starting position on the freshman team, his accomplishments felt hollow. He knew he wasn't earning his success honestly. When financial strain forced his mother to transfer him to a public school, David's sense of identity became even more fractured. At North Central High School, he embraced the persona of a cool, tough kid. His wardrobe shifted to oversized hip-hop-inspired clothing, and he surrounded himself with a group of peers who lived on the fringes of delinquency. This new identity was a mask, a way to hide his insecurities and blend into an environment that valued image over substance. But his mother, sensing the danger of this path, uprooted the family again, moving them back to the small-town life in Brazil. Returning to a predominantly white school as a young black teenager with a city-influenced persona only amplified David's feelings of alienation. He was constantly judged, both for his race and his adopted demeanor. His teachers saw him as a troublemaker or a failure, while his peers viewed him as an outsider. These experiences forced him to confront the uncomfortable truth about how the world perceives people who don't fit neatly into its expectations. As he navigated these challenges, David began to understand that avoiding the truth, whether about his academic dishonesty, his deep-seated fears, or his identity, only created more obstacles. The lie he lived was beginning to suffocate him. His life seemed defined by a series of survival tactics: cheating to get by in school, crafting a tough exterior to mask his insecurities, and burying his pain under layers of anger. But these coping mechanisms weren't solutions, they were barriers to growth. This chapter reveals a critical turning point in Goggins' philosophy. He learned that growth begins with brutal honesty. Facing the truth about yourself isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. For David, This meant acknowledging that he wasn't just a victim of circumstance, he was also complicit in his own stagnation. His willingness to cheat and hide from challenges was preventing him from becoming the person he wanted to be. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it laid the groundwork for the mindset shifts that would later define his extraordinary journey. The lessons of this chapter are universal. We all have aspects of ourselves we'd rather avoid, failures, insecurities, and habits that hold us back. Goggins' story forces us to examine those parts of ourselves with unflinching honesty. It's only by shining a light on these truths that we can begin to change them. For David, this process wasn't about seeking pity or making excuses. It was about reclaiming control. By owning his failures and weaknesses, he could finally start to rewrite his story. Through the pain of loss, the disconnection from his mother, and the struggles of fitting into environments that didn't understand him, David began to glimpse the power of self-accountability. He realized that waiting for the world to change or for someone to rescue him would only lead to more disappointment. If he wanted a different life, he had to confront the truth of who he was and take responsibility for changing it. In this chapter, Goggins doesn't provide easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, he offers a challenge: to sit with the discomfort of your truth and let it fuel your transformation. For listeners, the lesson is clear. Whether you're avoiding your weaknesses, hiding behind a facade, or blaming external circumstances for your struggles, the first step toward growth is to face reality. The truth might hurt, but it's also your greatest ally in the fight to become the best version of yourself. David Goggins' life was a series of impossible tasks, but in this chapter, he dives into a specific period when he took on challenges that seemed insurmountable to everyone, including himself. By this point, Goggins had grown tired of simply surviving. He wanted to prove to himself, and the world, that he could achieve what others deemed impossible. This chapter is not just a recounting of physical feats, it's a deep dive into the mental transformation required to take on overwhelming challenges and emerge victorious. Goggins begins this chapter by describing his life at 300 pounds. Working as an exterminator, spraying for cockroaches, and binge-eating fast food, he was stuck in a cycle of mediocrity. The man he saw in the mirror was far from the Navy SEAL he had once dreamed of becoming. The mere idea of running a mile, let alone joining the most elite military training program in the world, seemed impossible. Yet, something inside him snapped. He realized that unless he confronted his excuses and destroyed his limits, he would live and die in that unremarkable version of himself. The impossible task for Goggins wasn't just physical, it was mental. He decided to pursue Navy SEAL training, but the barriers were staggering. To qualify, he needed to lose over 100 pounds in 3 months. This wasn't a minor weight loss goal, it was a complete overhaul of his lifestyle, his habits, and his mindset. Most people would have written off such a goal as unattainable. Goggins, however, started to see impossibility as an invitation. The tighter the deadline, the more grueling the challenge, the more it appealed to his need to prove himself wrong. He started with small steps. Instead of setting out to lose 100 pounds immediately, he focused on one meal, one workout, and one day at a time. Each day became a battle to win against his own laziness and self-doubt. He switched from fast food to a strict, clean diet. He started walking, then running, pushing his body further with each passing day. The workouts were excruciating, and the weight seemed to shed painfully slowly at first, but he didn't let frustration derail him. What separated Goggins from others attempting similar feats was his ability to turn obstacles into fuel. When he was told by a Navy recruiter that he couldn't apply due to his weight and low academic scores, he didn't give up. Instead, he used that rejection as motivation to work harder. He didn't just lose weight, he began studying for the ASVAB, the military entrance exam, with the same level of intensity he brought to his physical training. Late nights were spent poring over study materials, forcing himself to relearn what he hadn't grasped in school due to years of academic neglect and cheating. This period of his life was a masterclass in self-discipline and focus. Goggins broke the task into manageable pieces. He focused on showing up every day, regardless of how tired, sore, or frustrated he felt. He refused to allow excuses to creep in. While others would have justified quitting with perfectly logical reasons, his weight, his past, his limited time, he saw every excuse as a lie holding him back. The turning point came when Goggins finally met the weight requirements and passed the ASVAB. It was a monumental achievement, but it was only the beginning. He now faced the grueling reality of Navy SEAL training, particularly the infamous Hell Week. For most, this would have been the pinnacle of difficulty, but for Goggins, it was another opportunity to push beyond what others thought was possible. He vividly recounts his first encounter with Hell Week. The cold, relentless water sessions, the physical pain, and the mental exhaustion pushed him to the brink. In a particularly vivid moment, Goggins recalls shivering uncontrollably in freezing water, his muscles cramping, and his mind screaming for him to quit. But instead of succumbing to the pain, he tapped into a mental reserve he had built through months of preparation. He reminded himself why he was there, to prove to himself that he could endure. Goggins didn't complete Hell Week on his first attempt. Injuries forced him out, a setback that would have broken most people. But instead of seeing failure as the end, Goggins reframed it. He saw it as a lesson, an opportunity to come back stronger. He returned to training with an even greater determination, eventually completing Hell Week and earning his place among the Navy SEALs. This chapter teaches listeners that the impossible task isn't about achieving perfection, it's about committing to relentless effort. Goggins' journey from 300 pounds to becoming a Navy SEAL wasn't smooth or linear. It was filled with failures, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But by focusing on the process rather than the outcome, he was able to turn what seemed impossible into reality. For anyone listening, the lesson is clear: the limits we place on ourselves are often illusions. The key to overcoming them is breaking the task into smaller steps and attacking each one with unwavering focus. It's about showing up, day after day, even when progress feels slow or non-existent. The impossible task isn't defeated in a single moment of triumph, it's conquered through a series of daily battles. By the end of this chapter, Goggins has redefined what is possible, not just for himself but for anyone willing to put in the work. His story is a challenge to the listener: what impossible task are you avoiding? And what small steps can you take today to start proving yourself wrong? In this chapter, David Goggins introduces one of the most defining aspects of his mindset, the concept of taking souls. This isn't about literal conquest or competition in the traditional sense. It's a mental game, a philosophy for pushing beyond limits and turning the tables on any situation that seems stacked against you. Taking souls is about outlasting your adversaries, proving people wrong, and using your sheer willpower to make others question their own capabilities. The term, taking souls, originated during Goggins' Navy SEAL Hell Week, one of the most grueling military training exercises in the world. Hell Week is designed to break people. It's 6 days of relentless physical and mental challenges, with little to no sleep and constant exposure to the elements. For most, the goal is simply to survive, but Goggins flipped this script entirely. He decided to not only survive but thrive, and, in doing so, to break the spirits of the instructors who were pushing him and his peers to their limits. One particularly vivid example from Hell Week serves as the foundation for this philosophy. Goggins and his boat crew were tasked with carrying a large log across the beach for hours on end. The instructors, standing off to the side, shouted at them, mocked their efforts, and waited for them to falter. Most of the trainees were mentally broken by this, their spirits crushed under the relentless demands of the exercise. But Goggins saw an opportunity. Instead of letting the instructors get to him, he used their taunts as fuel. He smiled at them through his pain, laughed at their attempts to break him, and encouraged his teammates to do the same. This unexpected reaction threw the instructors off balance. Instead of looking like a victim of their punishment, Goggins became a symbol of defiance and strength. He had taken their souls. This moment wasn't just a display of resilience, it was a strategic move. By showing the instructors that their efforts to crush him were failing, Goggins shifted the power dynamic. The instructors, who were supposed to be in control, began questioning their own effectiveness. Meanwhile, Goggins and his team felt reinvigorated. They had reclaimed their power, and that mental edge made all the difference in their performance. But, taking souls isn't just about military training, it's a mindset that can be applied to any challenge in life. Goggins shares another story from his ultramarathon career, when he was running the Badwater 135, one of the toughest foot races in the world. After hours of running through the scorching heat of Death Valley, most runners were barely clinging to their willpower. Their bodies were failing, their minds begging them to quit. Goggins, too, was suffering, but he chose to harness that pain. Instead of focusing on his discomfort, he zeroed in on the suffering of those around him. He passed other runners with a smile, making them wonder how he was still moving so confidently. His goal wasn't just to win but to take their souls, to make them question whether they could continue when he seemed unstoppable. This tactic is not about cruelty or arrogance, it's about finding strength in the face of adversity. By focusing on outperforming others, mentally and physically, you can inspire yourself to go further than you ever thought possible. When Goggins takes souls, he isn't just proving something to those around him, he's proving something to himself. Every time he smiles through the pain, every time he pushes beyond what others expect, he reinforces his belief in his own resilience. The philosophy of taking souls can also be applied to more personal struggles. Goggins recalls moments when people underestimated him, doubted his abilities, or even openly mocked him. Instead of internalizing their negativity, he used it as motivation. Their doubt became a challenge, a way for him to prove them wrong. Whether it was a teacher who dismissed his potential, a colleague who questioned his work ethic, or a competitor who underestimated his grit, Goggins saw every doubter as an opportunity to take a soul. This mindset is powerful because it reframes adversity. Instead of seeing challenges as insurmountable obstacles, Goggins saw them as games he could win. Every setback became a chance to rise higher, every insult a reason to work harder. By focusing on taking souls, he transformed himself from a victim of his circumstances into a master of his fate. For listeners, the lesson is clear: when life throws challenges your way, you have two choices. You can let them crush you, or you can rise above them and use them as fuel. Taking souls isn't about being better than others, it's about being better than the version of yourself that gives up, that listens to doubt, that lets fear dictate your actions. It's about using every moment of pain or struggle as an opportunity to grow stronger and more resilient. This chapter challenges us to reframe the way we view hardship. Instead of seeing adversity as something to endure, Goggins teaches us to see it as a proving ground. When you smile in the face of pain, when you laugh at the things that are supposed to break you, you're not just surviving, you're thriving. You're showing the world, and yourself, that nothing can stop you. By the end of this chapter, the listener understands that taking souls is not just a strategy for overcoming challenges, it's a mindset for life. It's about finding joy in struggle, strength in pain, and power in the face of doubt. It's a reminder that no matter how tough things get, you always have the ability to push further, fight harder, and take control of your destiny. In this chapter, David Goggins introduces the concept of building an armored mind, a mental state so resilient and unyielding that it can withstand the relentless pressures of life. For Goggins, the mind is a muscle, and like any other muscle, it can be strengthened through consistent effort, repetition, and exposure to adversity. He believes that true mental toughness is not something you are born with, it is forged through struggle and hard work. Goggins opens with the premise that most people live their lives at a fraction of their potential because they allow their minds to be controlled by fear, comfort, and excuses. He uses his own life as a case study, describing the numerous times he could have quit or given into pain. Instead of succumbing, he chose to lean into discomfort, using it as a tool to callous his mind. This process, he explains, is not glamorous. It's grueling, lonely, and often painful, but it's the only way to achieve true mastery over yourself. One of the most impactful stories in this chapter is about Goggins' experience during Navy SEAL training, specifically during his second Hell Week. Unlike the first time, when he was forced to quit due to injury, this time he was determined to endure no matter what. The cold water, the physical exhaustion, and the relentless demands of the instructors tested every fiber of his being. But Goggins had a secret weapon, his armored mind. He had spent months preparing, not just physically but mentally. He had conditioned himself to expect pain, to embrace it, and to see it as a necessary part of growth. A pivotal moment came during one of the coldest nights of Hell Week. As the trainees lay shivering in the freezing water, some began to cry, others quit, and many reached their breaking point. Goggins, however, found strength in the suffering. He realized that while his body was cold and in pain, his mind could remain strong. He began to laugh, a sound that confused both his fellow trainees and the instructors. For Goggins, this laughter was proof that he was in control. The cold couldn't touch his spirit, and that realization gave him the mental edge he needed to keep going. Building an armored mind, Goggins explains, requires intentional exposure to discomfort. You can't strengthen your resolve by avoiding pain, you must seek it out and use it as a training ground. He compares this process to callousing your hands. Just as repeated friction creates tough, durable skin, repeated exposure to adversity creates a tough, durable mind. Over time, challenges that once seemed insurmountable become manageable, and your ability to handle stress and pressure increases exponentially. Another example Goggins shares is his journey to becoming an ultramarathon runner. After his first disastrous race, where he nearly died from dehydration and kidney failure, most people would have sworn off endurance running forever. But Goggins saw the experience as an opportunity to grow. He began training his mind to endure the pain and monotony of long-distance running. He forced himself to run in extreme conditions, from scorching heat to freezing cold, deliberately putting himself in situations where quitting would have been the easier choice. Through this process, he built a mental toughness that allowed him to complete some of the most grueling races in the world, including the Badwater 135. One of the key principles in this chapter is the importance of accountability. Goggins emphasizes that building an armored mind starts with being brutally honest with yourself. He kept a notebook, which he called his accountability mirror, where he wrote down his weaknesses, failures, and goals. Each day, he faced those truths head-on, refusing to make excuses or sugarcoat his shortcomings. This practice forced him to confront his fears and insecurities, laying the foundation for the mental fortitude he would later rely on. For listeners, the lesson is clear: mental toughness is a skill that anyone can develop, but it requires consistent effort and a willingness to face discomfort. Goggins challenges us to examine our own lives and identify the areas where we are avoiding pain or making excuses. He encourages us to push ourselves beyond our comfort zones, to seek out challenges that scare us, and to embrace failure as a necessary part of growth. This chapter is also a powerful reminder that the mind controls the body. Goggins explains that when your mind is strong, your body will follow. Most people quit long before their physical limits are reached because their minds give up first. By training your mind to endure, you unlock a level of potential that most people never even glimpse. The armored mind is not about being invulnerable, it's about being unbreakable. It's the ability to keep going when everything in your body and environment tells you to stop. It's about finding strength in the face of adversity and using pain as a tool for growth. Goggins' own journey proves that this kind of mental toughness is possible, even for someone who started at rock bottom. For anyone listening, this chapter is a call to action. If you want to achieve greatness, you must start by building an armored mind. This means holding yourself accountable, seeking out challenges, and refusing to let fear or discomfort dictate your actions. It means embracing the struggle and using it to forge a version of yourself that is stronger, tougher, and more resilient than you ever thought possible. By the end of this chapter, the listener is left with a clear understanding of what it takes to build an armored mind and why it is essential for overcoming life's obstacles. Goggins' stories and lessons are both inspiring and practical, providing a roadmap for anyone willing to put in the work to transform their mindset. In this chapter, David Goggins delves into one of his most powerful realizations, that true fulfillment doesn't come from external recognition or awards but from internal mastery and pushing beyond self-imposed limits. He explains that trophies, medals, and accolades may serve as motivators, but they should never be the end goal. The real reward is the person you become through the struggle and the growth you achieve by doing what others believe to be impossible. Goggins begins by recounting a moment from his military career when he passed one of the hardest training programs imaginable, Navy SEAL qualification. Earning the coveted trident pin, a symbol of becoming a SEAL, was a monumental achievement, one that very few people accomplish. But when the ceremony ended and the applause faded, Goggins found himself feeling strangely empty. He realized that while the recognition was gratifying, it wasn't the source of his drive. What mattered more was the transformation he had undergone during the grueling training. The long nights, the freezing cold water, and the endless physical challenges had forced him to confront his weaknesses and emerge stronger. The trident was just a symbol, the real prize was the unbreakable mindset he had built along the way. This realization became a recurring theme in Goggins' life. He shares another story about one of his ultramarathon races, a grueling 100-mile event. For most competitors, finishing the race was the ultimate goal, a reason to celebrate. But for Goggins, the real victory wasn't crossing the finish line, it was pushing himself during the race, especially in the moments when his body screamed for him to quit. He recalls a point around mile 70 when every step felt like fire, his legs cramping and his mind flooded with doubt. He kept going, not because of the medal waiting for him at the end but because he wanted to test his limits. The deeper the pain, the more he realized the race wasn't about the distance, it was about his own ability to endure. One of the key insights from this chapter is the idea of redefining success. Goggins emphasizes that society often measures success through external validation, trophies, money, status, or recognition. But these rewards are fleeting and ultimately unsatisfying. Instead, he argues that success should be measured by how much effort you put into overcoming your personal barriers and growing as an individual. For Goggins, the satisfaction comes from knowing he gave everything he had, even when no one was watching. Another powerful example comes from his time as a recruiter for the Navy SEALs. Goggins was tasked with finding candidates who could meet the rigorous demands of SEAL training, a job that required him to travel across the country and speak to thousands of young men and women. He found that many of them were drawn to the allure of the SEALs, the prestige, the trident, the sense of being part of an elite group. But Goggins would quickly disillusion them. He explained that the pin meant nothing if they didn't have the discipline, grit, and mental toughness to back it up. The real value of being a SEAL wasn't the title but the journey of becoming one, the process of breaking down your ego and rebuilding yourself into someone who could thrive under pressure. Goggins also reflects on his personal struggles with comparing himself to others. Early in his career, he would often look at those who seemed to achieve success more easily, people who were naturally gifted, wealthier, or had better opportunities, and feel frustrated. Over time, he learned that comparing himself to others was a distraction. Instead of chasing trophies or trying to keep up with others, he focused on competing with himself. He began setting personal goals that had nothing to do with external validation. Whether it was running further than he ever had before or completing tasks no one thought he could handle, his satisfaction came from proving to himself that he was capable of more. The concept of, "it's not about a trophy," is deeply tied to Goggins' philosophy of internal accountability. He introduces the idea that the toughest battles are often fought in solitude, away from the applause and recognition of others. When you're running alone in the dark, studying late into the night, or pushing through pain in a workout, there's no one to cheer you on. In those moments, the only thing that keeps you going is your own commitment to being better than you were yesterday. Goggins believes these quiet victories are far more meaningful than any public accolade because they represent true growth. For listeners, this chapter is a wake-up call to rethink what motivates them. Are you chasing trophies, promotions, or recognition? Or are you driven by a desire to improve yourself for your own sake? Goggins challenges us to let go of the need for external validation and focus instead on the process of growth. He reminds us that the medals and awards we accumulate may gather dust, but the strength, discipline, and resilience we build through hard work will last a lifetime. One of the most impactful takeaways from this chapter is the idea that every challenge, no matter how small or large, is an opportunity to grow. Goggins urges listeners to seek out discomfort and lean into it, not because of the rewards it might bring but because of the person it will help them become. The real prize isn't the trophy, it's the unshakable belief in yourself that comes from knowing you gave everything you had. By the end of this chapter, listeners are left with a profound understanding of why external rewards, while gratifying, are never enough. True fulfillment comes from the journey, the struggle, and the transformation you undergo along the way. For Goggins, and for anyone willing to embrace this mindset, life isn't about collecting trophies, it's about building an indomitable spirit. David Goggins describes the mind as the most powerful weapon in this chapter. It's a tool that can either propel you to extraordinary heights or trap you in a cycle of mediocrity, depending on how you wield it. He explains that while the body has its limits, the mind is capable of pushing far beyond those perceived boundaries. The key lies in taking control of it and refusing to let fear, doubt, or external circumstances dictate your actions. The chapter begins with a striking example of the mind's potential during Goggins' journey as a Navy SEAL. After enduring the grueling challenges of Hell Week, he faced yet another obstacle, a combat diving test that required extreme focus and mental strength. Goggins recalls the intense fear he felt during underwater drills, where even the slightest mistake could disqualify him or worse, endanger his life. The training was designed to create panic, but Goggins realized that the only way to pass was to master his mind. He had to block out fear and keep his focus razor-sharp, even when everything in his body screamed for him to surface. By concentrating on his breath and breaking the task into manageable steps, he overcame the test and passed one of the most demanding phases of SEAL training. This ability to master his mind didn't come naturally. Goggins emphasizes that mental toughness is a skill you must develop through intentional practice. He shares another story from his experience running ultramarathons, where he relied on what he calls his cookie jar. The cookie jar is a mental repository of past victories, hardships overcome, and moments of resilience. Whenever he faced a seemingly insurmountable challenge, Goggins would reach into his cookie jar and draw strength from those memories. He would remind himself of everything he had already survived and accomplished, using that as proof that he could endure whatever came next. One particularly grueling race highlights the power of this mindset. During a 100-mile event, Goggins found himself physically broken, with blisters covering his feet, his legs cramping, and his energy depleted. At mile 70, he hit a wall that many runners never recover from. But instead of quitting, he mentally reached into his cookie jar and replayed moments of triumph from his past, completing Hell Week, losing over 100 pounds to join the Navy, and surviving the hardships of his childhood. These memories fueled him, reigniting his belief that he could keep going. Step by agonizing step, he pushed forward and finished the race. The concept of the cookie jar is universal. Everyone has moments in their lives where they've faced adversity and come out stronger. Goggins encourages listeners to take inventory of these moments and use them as ammunition when times get tough. When the mind tells you to quit, the cookie jar serves as a reminder that you've been here before, and you've survived. Another critical tool Goggins discusses in this chapter is visualization. He explains that the mind can be trained to see success even in the face of overwhelming odds. Before every major challenge, Goggins visualizes the process in vivid detail. He imagines the pain, the obstacles, and the moments of doubt, but he also sees himself overcoming them. This mental preparation creates a blueprint for success, allowing him to face challenges with confidence and resilience. For example, before attempting a record-breaking number of pull-ups in 24 hours, Goggins spent weeks visualizing every aspect of the event. He imagined the fatigue that would set in after the first few hours, the pain in his arms and shoulders, and the mental struggle to keep going. But he also visualized himself breaking the record, focusing on the joy and satisfaction of achieving his goal. This dual approach, acknowledging the difficulty while believing in the outcome, helped him persevere even when he failed multiple times before finally succeeding. Goggins also addresses the importance of eliminating negative self-talk. He explains that most people sabotage themselves with doubt and excuses before they even begin. To counteract this, he developed a habit of speaking to himself with honesty and encouragement. He doesn't sugarcoat his failures or weaknesses but instead uses them as motivation to improve. By reframing challenges as opportunities and replacing doubt with determination, he trains his mind to work for him, not against him. One of the most powerful lessons in this chapter is the idea that pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. Goggins explains that the mind often magnifies discomfort, making it seem unbearable in the moment. But by focusing on the long-term reward rather than the immediate pain, you can push through and achieve things you never thought possible. He reminds listeners that growth happens in the moments when you want to quit but choose to keep going anyway. For Goggins, the mind isn't just a tool, it's a weapon, capable of cutting through fear, doubt, and limitation. The process of mastering the mind isn't easy. It requires discipline, self-awareness, and a willingness to face discomfort head-on. But the rewards are immeasurable. By taking control of your thoughts and training your mind to work in your favor, you unlock a level of potential that most people never access. This chapter challenges listeners to rethink their relationship with their own minds. Are you letting fear and doubt dictate your actions? Or are you using your mind as a weapon to push through obstacles and achieve your goals? Goggins' story is proof that the mind's power is limitless, but only if you're willing to put in the work to harness it. By the end of this chapter, the listener understands that the greatest battles are fought within the mind. Whether it's enduring physical pain, overcoming self-doubt, or staying focused in the face of fear, the ability to control your thoughts is what separates success from failure. The mind is the most powerful weapon you have, and it's up to you to decide how you use it. In this chapter, David Goggins tackles one of the most pervasive myths about success, the belief that extraordinary achievements require extraordinary talent. For Goggins, talent is overrated. What truly matters is grit, hard work, and an unrelenting commitment to growth. He argues that anyone can accomplish great things if they're willing to put in the effort and embrace the grind, no matter their starting point. Goggins begins by reflecting on his own journey, a testament to the fact that talent isn't a prerequisite for success. He openly admits that he wasn't born with any special gifts. He wasn't a natural athlete or a prodigy in any field. In fact, much of his early life was marked by failure and mediocrity. He struggled academically, was overweight, and lacked direction. But what separated him from others wasn't talent, it was his decision to outwork everyone around him, no matter the odds. One of the most compelling examples Goggins shares in this chapter is his transformation from a 300-pound exterminator into a Navy SEAL. When he first walked into a Navy recruiter's office, he was laughed at. His weight alone made him an unlikely candidate, and his past failures seemed to confirm that he didn't have what it took. But instead of accepting this as a limitation, Goggins saw it as a challenge. He realized that while he couldn't control his lack of natural talent, he could control his effort. And so, he embarked on a grueling 3-month journey to lose over 100 pounds, study for the military entrance exam, and prove to himself, and the world, that hard work could trump genetics and circumstance. Goggins emphasizes that effort is the great equalizer. While some people may have natural advantages, those who are willing to outwork others can still come out on top. He recalls his time in Navy SEAL training, where many of the candidates were more athletic or better prepared than he was. But when things got tough, when the cold water, sleep deprivation, and physical pain broke the will of others, Goggins' sheer determination carried him through. He refused to quit, no matter how badly his body hurt or how impossible the task seemed. His success wasn't due to talent, it was the result of relentless perseverance. Another powerful example comes from Goggins' ultramarathon career. When he first entered the world of endurance running, he had no experience and no real understanding of what it took to compete in such events. His first ultramarathon was a disaster. He ran without proper training or preparation, pushing his body to the brink of collapse. Most people would have walked away after such a humbling experience, but Goggins saw it as an opportunity to learn. He studied the sport, trained harder, and came back stronger. Over time, he became one of the most respected endurance athletes in the world, not because he had a natural talent for running but because he was willing to endure more pain and put in more work than anyone else. Goggins also challenges the listener to examine their own lives. He argues that too many people use a lack of talent as an excuse for not pursuing their goals. They convince themselves that they aren't smart enough, strong enough, or talented enough to succeed, and so they never even try. Goggins calls this out as a lie. He explains that talent might make the road easier, but it's not a requirement. The only thing that truly matters is your willingness to do the work. A key part of this chapter is Goggins' emphasis on self-discipline. He explains that relying on motivation is a mistake because motivation is fleeting. It's easy to feel inspired when things are going well, but true progress comes from showing up even when you don't feel like it. For Goggins, discipline is the foundation of success. It's what gets you out of bed early, keeps you focused during tough times, and pushes you to keep going when the initial excitement wears off. To reinforce this point, Goggins shares his experience of breaking the world record for the most pull-ups in 24 hours. The record required an almost inhuman level of endurance and strength, but it wasn't talent that allowed him to achieve it. It was the countless hours of training, the meticulous planning, and the mental toughness he developed over years of pushing himself beyond his limits. Goggins failed multiple times before finally succeeding, but each failure only fueled his determination. His eventual success was proof that hard work and perseverance could accomplish what talent alone never could. For listeners, this chapter is a call to action. Goggins challenges you to let go of the idea that you need to be naturally gifted to achieve greatness. He urges you to focus on what you can control: your effort, your discipline, and your attitude. Whether you want to excel in your career, improve your fitness, or achieve a personal goal, the formula is the same: outwork everyone else and refuse to quit. This chapter also encourages listeners to redefine their relationship with failure. Goggins explains that failure isn't something to fear, it's a necessary part of growth. Every failure is an opportunity to learn, adapt, and come back stronger. He reminds us that the most successful people in the world aren't those who never fail, they're the ones who fail repeatedly and use those failures as stepping stones to success. By the end of this chapter, listeners are left with a powerful message: talent is optional, but effort is mandatory. Success doesn't require special abilities or perfect conditions. It requires grit, discipline, and an unshakable belief in your ability to improve. Goggins' life is proof that anyone, regardless of their starting point, can achieve greatness if they're willing to put in the work. In Chapter 9, David Goggins explores what it truly means to push beyond greatness and excel in environments where excellence is already the norm. This chapter is about striving not just to be good, not just to be better, but to become extraordinary in a field where everyone is already considered elite. It's about setting a new standard for yourself, even when others might think you've already arrived. Goggins starts by recounting his time in the Navy SEALs, an organization built around some of the toughest, most capable individuals in the world. For most, simply earning the trident and becoming a SEAL would be the pinnacle of achievement. But Goggins wasn't satisfied with simply being part of the team. He wanted to be the best, even among the best. He didn't want to just survive SEAL training or blend in with his peers, he wanted to be uncommon amongst the uncommon. This mindset became evident during his deployments and training missions. Goggins recalls moments when he would intentionally push himself harder than anyone else. While other SEALs were content with completing their tasks to the high standards expected of them, Goggins would go above and beyond, even when no one was watching. During long ruck marches or underwater drills, he would focus on being the last man standing, the one who could endure more than anyone else. It wasn't about outperforming his teammates for the sake of competition, it was about proving to himself that he could always dig deeper. One story that exemplifies this philosophy occurred during a grueling SEAL training mission. The task involved carrying heavy gear over long distances in brutal conditions. Many of his teammates, as elite as they were, began to slow down, visibly struggling with the physical toll. Goggins, feeling the same pain and exhaustion, decided he wouldn't just keep up, he would take the lead. By setting the pace and refusing to show weakness, he inspired his team to push harder. In that moment, he wasn't just another SEAL, he was setting an example of what true mental toughness looked like. Goggins explains that the mindset of being uncommon amongst the uncommon requires a deep level of self-discipline and accountability. It's easy to settle for being good enough when you're already at the top of your field. But for Goggins, there's always another level to reach. This relentless drive isn't about seeking validation from others, it's about holding yourself to a higher standard than anyone else ever could. It's about constantly asking, what more can I do? Another powerful example comes from Goggins' ultramarathon career. After establishing himself as a formidable endurance athlete, he entered races where he competed against the world's best runners. In these events, simply finishing was a remarkable achievement, but Goggins didn't stop there. He wanted to set himself apart. He recalls a specific race where extreme heat and brutal terrain caused many runners to drop out. Goggins, suffering just as much as the others, decided to use the pain as fuel. He began to pick up his pace, passing runners who had once been ahead of him, not because he was naturally faster but because he was willing to endure more. His goal wasn't just to finish, it was to prove to himself that he could compete with the best of the best. Goggins also shares insights from his work as a military instructor, where he trained some of the most promising recruits. Even among these highly capable individuals, Goggins maintained his philosophy of being uncommon amongst the uncommon. He pushed his students hard, not because he wanted to break them but because he wanted to show them what they were truly capable of. By holding himself to the same high standards, he led by example, demonstrating that greatness isn't a destination but a constant process of self-improvement. This chapter challenges listeners to examine their own lives. Are you content with being good enough, or are you willing to push for something greater? Goggins emphasizes that this mindset isn't limited to elite athletes or military personnel. It's a principle that can be applied to any area of life, whether it's your career, relationships, or personal development. The goal is to refuse to settle, even when others might praise you for what you've already achieved. One of the key takeaways from this chapter is the idea that greatness requires discomfort. Goggins explains that the only way to become uncommon amongst the uncommon is to constantly seek out challenges that force you to grow. It means doing the hard things, even when you don't feel like it, and refusing to let complacency take hold. For Goggins, comfort is the enemy of progress, and true growth happens only when you push yourself beyond what you think is possible. Another powerful lesson is the importance of self-accountability. Goggins stresses that being uncommon amongst the uncommon isn't about competing with others, it's about competing with yourself. It's about holding yourself to a higher standard and refusing to make excuses. Even when you're surrounded by high achievers, you have to find ways to stand out, not for their approval but for your own sense of accomplishment. By the end of this chapter, listeners are left with a clear understanding of what it takes to excel in any environment. Goggins' stories and insights reveal that being uncommon amongst the uncommon isn't about talent or luck, it's about mindset. It's about refusing to settle, embracing discomfort, and constantly striving for growth. For anyone willing to adopt this philosophy, the rewards are not just external achievements but an unshakable belief in your own potential. In this chapter, David Goggins reframes failure as one of the most powerful tools for growth and success. While most people fear failure and avoid it at all costs, Goggins embraces it as a necessary step in the journey toward self-mastery. He argues that failure is not the end of the road, it's a lesson, a test, and an opportunity to recalibrate, adapt, and come back stronger. Goggins begins by sharing his own relationship with failure, recounting moments in his life where he faced devastating setbacks. One of the most impactful examples comes from his attempt to break the world record for the most pull-ups in 24 hours. Goggins trained relentlessly for months, meticulously preparing his body and mind for the challenge. When the day finally came, he began strong, knocking out hundreds of pull-ups in the first few hours. But as the hours dragged on, his body began to break down. Pain radiated through his muscles, his grip faltered, and his hands were shredded from gripping the bar. Despite his mental toughness, his body gave out, and he was forced to quit before reaching the record. For most people, such a public and painful failure would have been a reason to walk away. But Goggins saw it differently. Instead of being ashamed or defeated, he viewed the experience as invaluable data. He analyzed every aspect of what went wrong, his training, his pacing, his nutrition, and used those lessons to refine his approach. Just a few months later, he attempted the record again, only to fail once more. But instead of letting the repeated setbacks crush his spirit, Goggins doubled down on his efforts. He trained harder, smarter, and with even greater resolve. On his third attempt, he finally broke the record, completing over 4,000 pull-ups in 24 hours. This story illustrates one of Goggins' core principles: failure is only permanent if you quit. He explains that each failure contains valuable lessons that can propel you forward, but only if you're willing to confront it head-on. For Goggins, failure isn't something to be avoided, it's something to be embraced. Every time you fail, you gain insights that bring you closer to success. Goggins also shares another story from his ultramarathon career. Early on, he entered a 100-mile race with little preparation, believing his mental toughness would be enough to carry him through. By mile 70, his body was in shambles. He was dehydrated, his feet were blistered and bleeding, and he was suffering from kidney failure. He finished the race, but the experience left him humbled and broken. Instead of walking away from ultra-running, he used the failure as a wake-up call. He realized that mental toughness alone wasn't enough, he needed to prepare better, train smarter, and respect the process. Over time, he became one of the most respected endurance athletes in the world, not because he avoided failure but because he learned from it. This chapter also dives into the psychological impact of failure. Goggins explains that most people fear failure because they associate it with weakness or incompetence. They let their ego get in the way, interpreting setbacks as personal flaws rather than opportunities for growth. Goggins challenges listeners to reframe their thinking. He argues that failure is not a reflection of who you are, it's a necessary part of the journey toward who you want to become. The key is to detach from the fear of judgment and focus on the lessons embedded in each failure. A critical takeaway from this chapter is the idea that failure builds resilience. Every time you fail and get back up, you strengthen your ability to endure. Goggins compares this process to callousing your mind. Just as repeated physical friction creates tougher skin, repeated exposure to failure creates a tougher, more resilient mindset. Over time, you become less afraid of setbacks because you've proven to yourself that you can handle them and emerge stronger. For Goggins, failure is also a test of character. He explains that anyone can keep going when things are easy, but the real test comes when you're faced with adversity. How you respond to failure reveals your true potential. Do you give up and let the setback define you, or do you use it as fuel to push forward? Goggins' own life is a testament to the power of perseverance. From his struggles in school to his failures in the military and ultra-running, he has repeatedly turned setbacks into stepping stones toward success. This chapter also provides practical advice for listeners. Goggins encourages you to actively seek out challenges that might result in failure. He explains that playing it safe limits your growth, while stepping outside your comfort zone forces you to confront your weaknesses and improve. Whether it's taking on a demanding project at work, signing up for a race you're not sure you can finish, or pursuing a goal that seems out of reach, the willingness to risk failure is what separates those who achieve greatness from those who settle for mediocrity. By the end of this chapter, listeners are left with a new perspective on failure. It's no longer something to fear or avoid, it's a necessary part of the journey toward success. Goggins' stories and insights reveal that failure is not the opposite of success, it's a crucial component of it. For anyone willing to embrace this mindset, the rewards are immeasurable. Failure becomes a teacher, a motivator, and a catalyst for growth. This chapter challenges listeners to examine their own relationship with failure. Are you letting the fear of setbacks hold you back, or are you using failure as a tool to propel yourself forward? Goggins' message is clear: failure is not the end. It's the beginning of a new chapter, one that can lead to extraordinary achievements if you're willing to learn, adapt, and keep moving forward. In this final chapter, David Goggins introduces a powerful question that shaped his life and can profoundly impact the lives of listeners: what if? This simple question is both a challenge and an invitation. It's about imagining what could happen if you stopped holding yourself back, rejected limitations, and pursued your potential with everything you had. For Goggins, asking what if became a tool for visualizing the extraordinary and pushing himself to new heights. Goggins opens the chapter by reflecting on the obstacles he faced throughout his life. From his abusive childhood to his battles with obesity, academic struggles, and failures, the odds were never in his favor. But instead of letting these circumstances define him, he began asking himself, what if I could overcome this? This question reframed his struggles as opportunities. It allowed him to see beyond his current reality and imagine a better future, one where he was no longer a victim of his circumstances but a master of his destiny. One of the most compelling examples in this chapter comes from Goggins' Navy SEAL training. At the time, he was surrounded by some of the toughest and most capable individuals on the planet. Many of his peers came from athletic or military backgrounds, while Goggins had to fight his way into the program, overcoming significant physical and mental hurdles. He could have easily seen himself as an underdog, someone who didn't belong. But instead, he asked, what if I could be the best here? What if I could not only survive but thrive in this environment? This mindset drove him to push harder, endure more, and ultimately set himself apart as one of the most mentally tough candidates in the program. Goggins explains that the what if question isn't about fantasizing or daydreaming, it's about action. It's about using your imagination to break free from self-imposed limits and then taking the steps necessary to turn that vision into reality. For him, the question became a constant source of motivation. Every time he faced a challenge, he would ask himself what would happen if he succeeded. What if I could run 100 miles? What if I could break the pull-up record? What if I could inspire others by proving that anything is possible? He shares another story from his ultramarathon career to illustrate the power of this mindset. During one of the most challenging races of his life, the Moab 240, Goggins found himself in excruciating pain. His feet were blistered, his body was exhausted, and every step felt like a battle. Most people would have quit, and even Goggins' mind was telling him to stop. But instead of giving in, he asked, what if I can finish this race? What if I can push through this pain and prove to myself that I'm capable of more than I ever imagined? That question gave him the strength to keep going, one agonizing step at a time, until he crossed the finish line. This chapter also touches on the importance of legacy. Goggins explains that asking what if isn't just about achieving personal goals, it's about leaving a lasting impact. He challenges listeners to consider what their lives could look like if they gave everything they had, not just for themselves but for those who might be inspired by their journey. What if your story could help someone else overcome their own struggles? What if your perseverance could set an example for your family, friends, or community? For Goggins, the answer to these questions is what drives him to keep pushing forward. Another powerful lesson from this chapter is the idea that fear and doubt often stem from our own limited perceptions. Goggins argues that most people never ask what if because they're afraid of failure or rejection. They stay in their comfort zones, convinced that they can't achieve more. But by daring to ask the question, you open yourself up to possibilities you might never have considered. You give yourself permission to dream bigger and work harder. Goggins encourages listeners to take this concept a step further by making a list of their what-if questions. What if you could lose the weight you've been struggling with? What if you could pursue the career you've always dreamed of? What if you could repair a broken relationship or achieve a goal that feels out of reach? Writing down these questions, he explains, is the first step toward turning them into reality. It forces you to confront the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and it challenges you to take action. This chapter ends with a powerful reflection on the idea of potential. Goggins believes that most people die without ever realizing their true potential because they never dared to ask, what if? They settle for mediocrity, content with a life that is comfortable but unremarkable. For Goggins, this is the ultimate tragedy. He challenges listeners to refuse to settle, to keep pushing, and to never stop asking the question that can change everything. The final message of this chapter is clear: your life is defined by the questions you ask and the actions you take. By embracing the what-if mindset, you unlock a world of possibilities. You stop seeing limitations and start seeing opportunities. And in doing so, you create a life that is not just lived but truly fulfilled. David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me delivers one powerful message: we are capable of far more than we believe, but unlocking our potential requires brutal honesty, relentless effort, and a willingness to embrace discomfort. By taking full accountability for our lives, we can overcome adversity, master our minds, and redefine what's possible. Key principles include: accountability, face the truth about your circumstances and take control of your growth. Callousing the mind, build mental resilience through repeated exposure to discomfort. Failure as a tool, use failure as a stepping stone for improvement, not an excuse to quit. Effort over talent, outwork everyone and refuse to rely on natural ability. Taking souls, shift power dynamics by thriving under pressure and exceeding expectations. What if, ask how far you can go if you stop limiting yourself and take action toward your goals. Ultimately, Goggins teaches us to embrace pain, seek challenges, and continuously push beyond our limits, not for external validation but to become the best versions of ourselves. The only limits are the ones you choose to accept. Thanks for watching. If you found value in this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe for more self-help book summaries, and share your thoughts in the comments. Remember, your potential is limitless. What's your next what if? See you in the next video.